The world is facing multiple crises from COVID-19. Many of them, at least currently, do not need to be the way they are. We could have provided access to the formulas to produce COVID vaccines to be made domestically in countries around the world, which could allay a great deal of the suffering that we're currently seeing. We have, as of right now, chosen as a country to not do that. Now, thankfully, there are some people who are pushing back against this. Let's go now to Senator Bernie Sanders.
Our vaccine distribution, we have a lot here. Should we start sharing it faster than we are now, particularly when you see what's going on in our hemisphere and in India? Should we be more aggressive here? It seems like we've been a bit, some might argue, overly cautious about our vaccine supply.
Well, I think a couple of things, Chuck. The answer is yes. I think we've got to obviously make sure that every American gets vaccinated as quickly as possible. But I do think not only do we have a moral responsibility to help the rest of the world, it's in our own self-interest. Because if this pandemic continues to spread in other countries, it's going to come back and bite us at one point or another. But the second thing we should do is not only make sure that excess vaccines in the United States get around to countries that need it, we should deal with this issue through the World Trade Organization of protecting the intellectual property rights of the drug companies. And I think what we have got to say right now to the drug companies, when millions of lives are at stake around the world, yes, allow other countries to have these intellectual property rights so that they can produce the vaccines that are desperately needed in poor countries. There is something morally objectionable about rich countries being able to get that vaccine, and yet millions and billions of people in poor countries are unable to afford it.
Yeah, Francesca, I love his last point, especially like we obviously are just sort of casually used to the fact that in the vast majority of cases, your life is going to be better off, better protected, extended, and all of that by being in one country versus another. But it's such a sharp distinction. Those maps showing like levels of vaccination in different countries are so predictable, so severe. I wish that there were more politicians speaking up about this, but it's pretty rare, at least in the Senate at this point.
Yeah, I mean, the question that Chuck Todd asked Bernie was interesting because it was essentially like, should we give the vaccine we have that is going unused elsewhere? And my initial reaction, which is so depressing, is how quickly Fox News and Republicans and conservatives would weaponize any attempt to give a vaccine supply that we have here, even though, like we've covered before, they are not encouraging their base or their voters to be vaccinated. They are allowing and ensuring the vaccinations go unused. And so, but if Biden ever, or if the White House ever tried to negotiate something, unless it was like let's move a plant back from Mexico to the United States. Like it'd have to be really couched in a lot of sort of like nationalistic, almost not Trumpian, but like, our country's so xenophobic, and we've been so anti-immigrant that I feel like how that would look would be terrible. But an easy workaround to that is to put pressure on the Biden administration and for Biden to actually, yes, put pressure on big pharma to allow intellectual property rights to be waived. And apparently, the Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, who is the Commerce Secretary, is like basically one of the biggest roadblocks into stopping this from happening. She's lobbied on behalf of big pharma, on private healthcare companies before. She helped hospitals avoid any kind of lawsuits in the case of COVID deaths and all this. So she has not been on the right side when it comes to big pharma versus the people, healthcare versus industry versus the people, and she's right up there in the White House. So it's like, this was an article in American Prospect, and apparently there are folks in the White House who are like, no, we should release this, we should put pressure on these pharma companies, and there are others who are like, not so fast, because I have a paycheck coming.
Yeah, having him surrounded by, I don't even know. Biden has said some things that seem to indicate some level of empathy, but he also has basically talked about America first. Like, we're gonna help out, we're gonna give some money, we're gonna give some vaccine, but first, everybody needs to be able to have access to it. And by the way, in America, virtually everyone does have access to it. Like, we've reached that threshold and people don't want it. Those numbers are dropping, they're gonna continue to drop. But he's also surrounded by people that have a more directly corporate set of motivations for stopping this from happening. And it needs to be done. Like, I don't know how many different ways we can stress it. I would hope that the moral argument would be enough for a country as religious as ours, saving lives rather than adding a few zeros to some of the most profitable corporations in the history of the world's bank account. Seems like a good argument. But even if that wasn't a good enough argument, you have the public health pragmatism of trying to not have global environments that are gonna produce variants of this virus that are gonna come back to wipe us out potentially. Or like if it's just a realpolitik thing, like other countries are doing vaccine diplomacy. Russia and China are doing these. We could be doing that too. We're choosing not to. And by the way, like shipping the vaccine is fine. That is not nearly as good as helping get factories set up in other countries actually produce them, especially for the variants of the vaccine that have to be refrigerated and all of that. Those are obviously very difficult to ship. Maybe J&J is easier, I don't know. But we could be doing that. We should have been doing that for months. Even starting now, like if Biden woke up and he was like, oh my God, I wanna be a moral guy. I'm gonna cancel student loan debt and then vaccines for these countries.
But that's like, a really important point.
Hold on 1 second. Yeah. Well, because let's look at the Indian numbers. So 3,400 deaths on May 2nd. How many months would it take if we decided today to really help? How many months of 3,400 or maybe 4,400 deaths or maybe 7,000 deaths in the near future? We can't put a value on human lives because the math's hard, but theoretically you could, and they are. These pharmaceutical companies very much have put a dollar value on the lives of people in these different countries. And apparently, I guess it's a lot of money, I guess. Sorry, Francesca, what were you gonna say?
No, and I think there's a cost benefit analysis. They're like, well, we're not getting money back for that. Oh, there's too many people, like their government hasn't paid us, like billions of dollars. So nah, it's not really, better just do some stock buybacks and reinvest in the next pandemic. Ooh, we're real excited about that. Like, I think what you pointed out about vaccine diplomacy is super important because meanwhile, the United States and even folks in the Biden administration continually discuss how we support democracy creation around the world. Oh, what's going on in Venezuela? What's going on in all these different countries? Oh, that we care about democracy. But when push comes to shove, what do? How do we intervene in most countries? Militarily. How do we intervene in most countries? Selling weapons. And when it comes to something like health, when it comes to a program we can so clearly help out in and would like in terms of accolades, clout, goodwill towards countries we're trying to build with would go very, very far. We don't got it. We don't have the infrastructure to actually help out when it comes to real, life and death healthcare.
Yeah, like you made the great point that they would lose their mind. Like if you threw 5 doses of J&J in a backpack and shipped it to Africa, Fox News would talk about it for 6 weeks straight. So any sort of wide scale program, they would not accept, even though they would rather inject poison into their lungs than take the vaccine. So there's a weird inconsistency there, but you're totally right. Like, I don't know, I guess everyone would freak out if I said, considering we could identify for basically every country in the world, some way that America has historically devastated it, caused massive loss of lives, economic problems, government overthrow, all of that. Let's put $1 trillion. Let's get rid of if we can't get rid of the intellectual property protections, we're just not gonna do that. Then let's buy the doses. Let's put $1 trillion into buying doses and shipping them to every country that needs them as one of the most massive economic measures of goodwill since, I don't know, some components of the Marshall Plan, a lot of that was pragmatism too, but let's do that. Let's do a massive moral good, a massive pragmatic public health good. Let's if he wants to restore the soul of America, that's not restoring the soul of America. That's actually kind of having a good soul for once and telling the world all of our massive resources that have largely been generated historically by exploiting other countries and our own people, and obviously the legacy of slavery and all that. We're gonna put some of that money into righting a bit of the wrongs. We can't get back the lives that were lost, but we're gonna try to save your lives now if we can. We could do that, but everyone would freak out if we proposed $1 to $2 trillion for that. It wouldn't just be Sean Hannity. Chuck Todd would lose his mind if AOC proposed that yesterday, if Bernie was pushing for that next week. But we could do it, we could. if we wanted to.
For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/thedamagereport. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.